welcome to Teacher Talk, the podcast for teachers who are lifers but still want to have a life. This is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, Johanna.
Hey, Johanna.
Hi, Jared.
What are we going to talk about today?
Grading.
Grading. Everyone's favorite thing. To do, to get.
To give.
Yeah, everyone likes grading.
Yes.
Why don't people actually like grading?
I think we gotta go further down the rabbit hole than that.
No, always you're complaining about grading. I have to grade.
No, I don't.
Well, not you. I mean, you as in teachers.
Oh, yes.
Teachers are constantly, if I hear them whine about one thing.
When there's standard-based grading now or standard reference grading,
it's just
and then there's
really
behavior grading.
The chore of the time of like, no, I can't come out. I have to grade.
Right.
That's probably the most common teacher friend thing I hear.
Yes. Yes.
Like it's your biggest outside of work chore.
Yes.
Grades are due.
Grades are due. In fact, do I talk about that? Because that's the thing
you do
I
every
feel.
once in a while.
Yeah.
That's for you. It sounds like it's mostly just clerical at that point.
It is clerical. I think a lot of teachers, it's clerical.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just clerical. Like people are spending time putting letters onto pieces of paper in a way that is chewing up their outside of work time.
Teachers feel an intense need to be extremely accurate with their grades. And I don't know.
Give me your elevator speech on grading. What is grading and how should it be used? Grading
is feedback. I know. I don't like that. That's the administrator answer.
Well, let me ask, do you grade?
I grade probably more than most teachers. I take more data probably than most teachers. I take data that parents have no clue some of the things I take data on that I don't even have like a reason to collect that data. But I'm kind of obsessed with numbers and making decisions based off of numbers, so I tend to be intense.
So grading is data.
Data. Yes, it's data for myself and it's data for my students that helps us make behavior choices.
Like what kind of behavior choices?
Good or bad. It makes us see the truth. It's like a scale. It's a truth teller.
I don't know what any of this means.
What do you mean?
What is truth? What is good or bad? What do you mean?
So when I take a grade, I am evaluating the student based off of a rubric or a scale, or even if there's a certain number correct, I create a rubric for that. But, or a checklist, and it's truth. It's just truth.
You sound like a cultist.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe I am kind of with grades. Teachers a lot of times want to base decisions or choices off of like, well, I'm in the classroom and I see it. And I am not a believer in that. I think what you see with your eyes lies.
Oh, yeah. There's
liar, liar, liar. My data will constantly point out I am a liar. I will make judgments off of...
So what kind of judgments? Like whether a kid actually knows something or not?
If a kid, yes, I'll think a kid knows something because they're making eye contact with me when I'm teaching it. And then I'll look at the data and I'll be like, what happened?
Sure.
Or I'll have a kid that's like, cannot sit still to save their life. And then next to him is another kid that can't sit still to save their life. And then one of them will like do extremely well. And then one of them will perform exactly how I thought they're going to perform. And I can't tell you how to tell the difference in between those two students if I'm watching them do it. Like
I love this because this is similar to the birth of behavioral economics when Kahneman and what was his name?
I don't remember names. That's not my thing. But is this the Thinking Fast or Slow book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tversky.
Yeah.
Because the birth of behavioral economics was them trying to evaluate applicants to officer candidate school in the Israeli army. You remember this in the book?
I do.
And they did little tests, like they had to like use like a great big piece of wood to cross a thing in a group, and like
Yep.
who looked like a leader and who looked confident and who looked like they would. And it turns out all of their observations were completely useless
Correct.
to who actually succeeded or failed in OCS.
Yes.
And so they invented a better way to evaluate it, and it was based on data. It was to score individual aspects of things without considering what their brain thought the whole picture looked like,
Right.
and to use that to guide the decisions.
Right. Yes.
Basically, similar thing.
Yes, I'm a huge, huge believer in data. And I think the teachers you hear complain will also be big believers in data. Like, they do all of that grading so that they have the data to make the decisions. But then in their mind, you gotta, they don't know how to get the data quickly and simply.
All right, so you get two kinds of enemies in this podcast,
Okay.
right?
I do. We do.
Enemy one
Okay.
is I don't really need to grade
Oh, yeah.
because I can just see.
They did a project. I'll grade the project.
I mean, we're all friends here. No one's really enemies, but you're contrasting your views against two kind of different views.
They did some worksheets.
I'm just gonna say enemies.
Okay. But I'm saying like that's what they'll say. I graded the project. I graded their worksheets. I graded homework completion.
Yeah, they completed.
Yeah, they'll collect there's there's lots of grades that are essentially observation grades.
Yeah,
I think those are useless.
right.
I mean, they're worth something if you assess later and you find out that the activities of participating in those things caused learning.
Is assess going to be one of our keywords here?
Assessment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that crucial to the idea of grading as assessment?
Yes. Performance assessment, yes. Key component. So I would say don't grade anything unless it is a performance assessment.
Don't grade anything unless it's a performance assessment.
Yes. Doesn't mean you don't have kids do things. It doesn't mean that you don't give kids feedback in the form of a grade, but I don't enter that information into
The grade.
the grade. I mean, I might not connect the dots for kids. Like, I'll put a grade on a paper and hand it back to them. And if they wanted to go and look and see whether I entered that in Infinite Campus or not, which happens to be the grading system we use, they could. But
Right. And then enemy two
yeah,
is I believe in grading, but there's no way to do it without spending a bunch of time on it.
correct.
So if I didn't spend any time on it or a bunch of time on it more than I wanted to, then my only other choice is to become enemy one.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So I think we should problem solve now.
First, I want to ask about what you mean by performance assessment. What does that mean, a performance assessment?
They are completing tasks with the learning where they aren't getting help from you or peers or outside influences at home.
So not necessarily a test, but a test is one classic example.
A classic example is a test.
But it's on your own, no help, execute or not, right?
Yes. I like to think of it like a cooking show. So
Oh, this is fun. I like this. People like cooking shows.
Okay.
We're going to connect with the audience here.
okay, we'll bond with them. So I'm not sure this is true, but I think this is what happens in cooking shows. Like, people in cooking shows are exposed outside of like the cooking show itself to like learning and demonstrations and practice sessions and coaching and guiding, right? That's how they get better, is that they're exposed to learning experiences. But what we see as the viewer, that's a performance assessment. When they're like, and here's one egg, go fry it perfectly. That's a performance assessment. Even though they may have watched an instructor do it multiple times, they might have had an instructor, I'm making this up, but they might have had an instructor watch them. They might have had an instructor taste it and give them feedback and do it again. None of those experiences mattered like the performance assessment.
So what's the wrong way to do it? If you say don't grade unless it's a performance assessment, are you talking about like, apologies as usual if no one teaches like in the olden one-room schoolhouse days, like when I was in class, we would dip our quills in the inkwell and then do homework. And sometimes homework was like 80% of the final grade. And then like actual performance assessment tests were 20%. And it didn't really matter how well you did on the test. You could get a good grade in the class just from like doing open book homework at night responsibly.
Yeah. My grades are based off of the fact that I didn't probably learn anything, but I was a very good homework completer.
That's an example of the what you're saying is not the right way? Correct. Are there other examples of grading not on performance assessments?
Projects. Teachers want to grade projects, and projects are really based off of how often did the student come and advocate for themselves and ask for help and assistance from the teacher. How good was the student at acknowledging what skills their peers were good at and getting them to help them with their project. The project is how you did the learning. It's how the more engaged you were in the project, probably the more you learned. But there's no evidence that that is true.
Which doesn't mean that homework and projects are bad.
Yes, they're essential.
But the grade should be based upon individual, no help, discrete performance.
Yes, that's not like one test holds all. I'm not advocating that.
Yeah, don't law school it and have the entire grade be the final exam.
Right, don't do that.
And not everything has to be a test, but I'm going to guess if you align with the behavioral economics thinking like I expect you to, if you were like having a speech be a performance that you assessed, you would say that a rubric is essential?
Yes. I'm going to say this so I don't forget. We need to do a whole podcast on rubrics. But grading, you got to take your work and the work that students do, and you have to put it in one of two categories. Do my kids need feedback in the form of a grade, and I'm going to enter the grade, and I'm going to make decisions based off of a grade? Or is this an activity or an experience that helps us conquer the learning? In which case, the type of feedback my kids need might be in the form of like a grade with a rubric, or it might be in the form of me creating learning groups.
And so you're drawing a clear distinction between learning and assessment?
Yes. So
there's learning time and there's assessment time. Don't mix the learning time into the data.
Right, and
it's not
don't
good data.
Spend the time grading it. Like when people think grading, they're grading Don't grade everything. Determine whether it's a learning activity and what you need from it, which is probably not a grade. Now, sometimes for motivation reasons, like right now, my kids need motivation. So my kids are doing activities and I'm reporting out a grade to them on a piece of paper. But like, it's not their grade. Like, it's not.
But you kind of can just look, you don't have to invest a lot of resources into making the grade really precise and valid.
Right.
You can just say, yeah, this is C+ work.
In fact, what I do is I sort them into 5 categories. And then super fast. Like if you don't worry about
Well, super fast right now, what are the 5 categories?
Oh, well, these are set by my district. So a 0 is no work, a B is beginning, a P is progressing, an M is meets, and an E is exceeds. And if I was grading something as simple as like people will have worksheets where they feel like they need to mark for the kids, like if you got 2, 5, and 7 wrong or something. No! Look at the work and decide, which category does this fit in?
So
and just literally group it and then write on it a B, and then B's for all worksheets mean the same thing. All P's for all worksheets mean the same. Not that I'm a huge advocate of worksheets, but like just for example's sake.
We're naturally starting to address enemy 2. So
Okay.
you're gonna maintain enemy 2's problem. If you're saying, oh, I have to spend so much time on grading, it's because they're grading learning and not just grading assessments.
Yes. And like sometimes it's important to grade the learning, but if it's important to grade the learning, then the kids should have an active role in grading it because they're going to learn from that experience. Now, that's like a whole, like getting kids to actively participate in that. But if you set up your rubric, so like let's say to get an E on this math homework,
Which is exceeds.
Okay. It isn't about I had all the right answers. It's the rubric is defining the work product on the paper. The student took multiple attempts at documenting their learning and their mental thought process. That's an exceeds.
Yeah.
Then you're going to get a kid that marks all over their paper when you're giving the answers and the feedback. You know, like versus a kid that's worried about whether they got it right or wrong. So change your rubric to match what you want to see. You on a learning activity don't want to see right answers. You want to see kids doing the mental
process.
work. Yeah, the process that will lead to right answers. So have a rubric that rewards that.
Right. And no one needs to stress about exactly whether it's a E or a P or a Z or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't actually matter to your official assessment grade.
And if you have kids that struggle with motivation, make it a bin. And if you feel comfortable making it worth 5% or 20% or 0%, I mean, when I had classes that struggled with motivation, like I would put it in Infinite Campus because putting in a missing, like this kid didn't do the learning activity, helped explain to parents like, well, this is why this was the test score. Like, look at all of these learning activities that this child missed.
So you're open to a little bit of it counts.
Only if it causes the learning, like you don't just assume all of it matters.
Right.
Try to do the least amount and then as you learn what your school and your students need.
If that's what works to get them to actually do it, go ahead and harness that. But still,
I got to get on the scale every day because it helps me make good food choices.
The vast majority is in the assessment, though?
Yes.
Okay. Are there anything else you want to address to Enemy 2?
Remind me what Enemy 2
Enemy
was
2
again.
is, I believe in grading, but there's no way to do it without doing a bunch of work. Or is that the key thing? Once you make a clear distinction between learning and assessment and grade the learning differently. You mentioned having the kids do it themselves.
Yes.
Which, tell me about what that looks like.
Okay, I structure this in one of three ways. Either A, the kid is assessing or scoring their own work. So essentially you're going over the answers or you're going over what you wanted to see, and then the kids are actively scoring their work. The one I tend to prefer is peer feedback, where peers have a specific list of questions that they are supposed to ask or do or give to their peer.
Which I think is, what you're concerned about is a good process rather than good results, that's probably a lot better, because it's so hard for your own mind to not just gloss over your own process and just focus on the result.
So if I'm doing a writing assignment, for example, because this is where I feel the pain of English teachers, like I feel like only I can go through and really tell the kid, like your comma punctuation is all off, or your, younger grades, you're forgetting to put things in sentences. But instead, give a peer one task, which is looking for capitalization.
Looking for passive voice.
Yes, one little thing. And then make the kids sign a statement. I am confident that there's no passive voice in this page.
Right.
or that I have marked with a check every line where I notice passive voice.
As an aside, I should apologize to my old English teachers.
Why?
Because I whined so much about the passive voice thing, but they were right.
They were right.
It's lazy writing.
It is. Yes.
I wrote an entire paper once where I changed all of the passive voice to a different form of passive voice using the different forms of the word to be. So like he was sleeping, he exists in a state of sleep.
Yeah, you're that kid. Uh-huh.
That way I didn't have any passive voice in it.
I'd like to think somewhere there's an English teacher that's like...
I don't know what turned me around eventually. I think it was the brief time I was in journalism school.
Oh, maybe.
And I saw what, like, pro tip to English teachers, maybe, the demands of journalistic writing back when it existed are really strict in a way. Like you've got the AP style and you've got the way that the has to be structured because it needs to be edited in a certain way. And it has to be that way. And the difference, one of the key sins of journalism, I think this is actually what it was, is passive voice, especially in a lead. He was found to be saying offensive things. What he was found, because it avoids the obligation of you saying who actually thought that, right?
Right.
And it's like one of the number one journalism sins. And I don't know, that kind of illuminated why the writing in all cases is weaker. So
Okay.
there you go. Pro tip, English teachers. Take
Pro
a look.
tip.
Go to the library, go to the microfiche back when newspapers existed, and bring up a real newspaper from, the before times, and then show that to the students and say, if you ever travel in time and have to get a job as a reporter and not just a blogger, you'll have to write like this. So, solved. Anyway, that's my passive voice aside.
Anywho.
Yeah.
Where were we?
We were saying, but we're talking about kids grading it.
Oh, yes. So you have editing, like learning how to edit is easier if you're learning how to edit somebody else's work and you're only editing one component. So for one student, like you might just say that number one is like if I assign the kids numbers. So number one's work is going to be edited by number 15 for capitalization.
Yeah.
And number 16 is going to check that you use quotations correctly and that you have 3 quotations.
Yep.
And then that lets the kids learn what they need to learn what they need to about quoting. But also it means you're not the first person providing the feedback, but kids need very specific, concrete things to provide feedback on.
Well, and also it's consistent with what you've been saying with it's rubric, like, which removes the temptation to edit it for whether it's, quote, good or not, which is a whole mess and part of why the English teacher feels obligated in the first place to their care and time to it, right?
Right.
It's because, well, I don't want them to feel like it's bad. And only I can really, like, handle that level of criticism with nuance. If you just say, no, don't worry about whether it's good or not. Don't worry about anything else. Just focus on correct quotation usage.
Right. And then I also use peers to provide content feedback.
How so?
So if the students are creating a product, then I want their peers to, I tend to use, stole this from someone else, but tell, ask, and give. And again, keep it very structured with a rubric. So tell them something that you learned or noticed while looking at their work. Ask them a question that is specific to their work. Give them advice based off of your learning experiences. And then that is another component that's required. You just made a face at me.
I was thinking about something else. Don't worry about it.
Okay. But when students know that a peer is going to be evaluating their work under this type of microscope, the work product changes a lot and the learning changes a lot. So, and then how much work was it for me as a teacher?
Not very much.
Not very much, because I'm evaluating the work after it's been through all of this.
You basically have the completed rubric.
I get very... So I still make a line on my mapped learning progression that says get feedback from teacher. And based on the assignment, I might have them do that 3 or 4 times. I might have them do it just once. But my feedback is more on a completed product and on the nuances of the learning rather than the just nuts and bolts, which is a better use of my time as an instructor.
Great. Does that handle enemy 2?
Yeah, that
right.
pretty much handles enemy 2.
Let's talk about enemy 1 then.
Enemy 1.
Enemy 1 is I don't really need to grade. I can just see.
Yes. Oh, no, you can't.
Okay. Why not? What do they think? What's wrong? What do you do about it?
Well, it depends whether they're required or not to give assessments.
Let's assume they are.
Depends the content, depends the school. I mean, that's the one reason why this whole No Child Left Behind and having kids take all these standardized tests.
Oh, you mean like those type of assessments?
People think that those are the enemy, and in many cases they are a hindrance to learning. But on the other hand, they make a teacher really see what kids know and what they don't know. Different content areas will feel different amounts of pressure to see what the kids know or don't know.
Because of the standardized assessments?
Yeah. An AP class is really good at this. It doesn't matter
because you get to grade.
the teacher can't control how many 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, or 5s they get.
Plus, they can't really...
they can, but...
They can't really whinge about, the kids didn't really try on the test, or the standardized assessment isn't really representative of what the content should be. I mean, none of those excuses apply to the AP teacher because they have motivated kids or they wouldn't be there. And the content is supposed to be exactly what the test is.
The content, at least for the AP classes that I've been exposed to, is extremely clear on what needs to be learned and how it's going to be assessed.
Well, I've never heard a teacher complain about the assessments on AP tests, but do they get evaluated based on how their students do on those tests?
Well, I mean, you get a group of teachers together that all teach an AP class and they will brag on what their numbers are. Absolutely.
Does the administration care?
I think that probably depends on the school.
I mean,
think about it. Like, as a parent, if you know this teacher gets kids that score high, you want your kids, and depending on your community, yeah, they're gonna know. And some states even will tell, not for AP, but for other assessments, they'll have you see a school score, which I think that's I think how scores are used is terrible.
You talking about AP scores? You talking about the government test?
The government test. However, I'm sure there's some website somewhere that lets you look up AP scores, but I think using it that way is terrible. But I think giving teachers concrete... and why do an assessment if the teacher doesn't get the feedback back in time for them to change instruction? I mean, that's one of my biggest complaints about how a lot of these tests are done, is they're done to evaluate the teacher or the school. They're not done so that those kids and those test scores can be changed. Which, what's the point?
Well, the point's to evaluate the teachers in the school, right?
Well, no. The point they'll say the point is so that the teachers can learn strategies that work and learn from each other that gets good scores, but I don't know. I think that's treating education like sales, and then I think that causes, we've talked about this before, but what's the best way to make sure you have high numbers, Jared? Influence who's in your class.
Right.
I mean, that, like, good teachers are encouraged under this system to make sure they have the best students possible, which is the exact opposite of what we should want. We should want good teachers in the hardest places to teach, not the easiest places to teach.
Yeah, well, there's a
Sorry,
lot.
I'm on my soapbox
You can
now.
go to my political podcast that doesn't exist, and we could talk about that. A brief snippet is No Child Left Behind is like an unholy monster created by Democrats trying to trick Republicans into giving a lot of money to public education, and Republicans trying to trick Democrats into proving that public education doesn't work so they can destroy it. And it's trying to do both of those things at the same time. And of course, it produces crazy results because it was born of those two purposes.
Anywho, what was our topic? What are we talking about?
We were talking about teachers that are forced to do assessments because there's this standardized test at the very least. And you're saying that's one subcategory of your enemy one. Well, I can just see, so I don't need to like grade performance.
Yes.
So you got category one, they're forced to do standardized assessments, so they can't just hide if they're not doing a good job with whatever method they're using to evaluate. And then there's probably another subgroup where they're not forced to do that, right?
Yes.
All right, so what's the consequence then? What do you say to either of them?
It's a lot easier to teach if you have assessment data and work off of assessment data. For behavior changes alone, the classroom where a teacher is responding to the genuine learning needs of a kid has less behavior problems than a classroom where it's one size fits all. It's more fun to teach if you're teaching kids exactly where they're at.
And that's one of your favorite things, pre-assessment, right?
Yes. So you would have to commit, whether your district required you or not, to pre-assessment, performance pre-assessment. I don't mean test. I mean, if you're a PE teacher, don't have them run the mile at the end of the year, or is the mile really what you want to assess? Like, do you really care that they get faster at the mile? Do you want to assess health? Are there multiple screenings you do for health? But actually collect that data.
Right.
Yeah, pre-assess.
And then even if you don't like doing this, you'll like it because the results will be too good.
The kids will respond differently in a classroom where they're tracking and monitoring their data. I mean, they just do. It's like trying to help someone lose weight and you don't have any sort of way for them to evaluate whether they're making growth or not.
Well, I mean, you look at them, kind of, I guess, right?
It's too slow.
Right.
Learning's too slow.
Right.
And boring. There's so many things that are more interesting than watching learning grow. I mean, it's like watching a plant grow.
Right. Not what I want to do. That's for sure.
I need to see that I am making growth.
But if you measure it every day,
If you measure it,
then you'll believe that it's making growth and it'll be easier to commit to it.
yes. In fact, I really like this analogy of growth because the activities, when you look at work, if it's something like, well, I watered the plant, I fed the plant, I exposed it to light, all of those things are activities that while sometimes evaluating the quality of the activity is important,
None of it really matters.
none of it matters in comparison to
How high the corn is?
how high the corn is. Yes.
All in the end, all that matters is the yield.
Yes. Yes. I feel like we're going to have a podcast, though, that goes into the weeds of how to do this. I feel like every teacher right now is yeah, I get it. but I don't get it.
Okay. Well, maybe that's one of the next ones then. Did you have anything to say to the I can just observe teachers with standardized tests?
What do you mean?
You kind of broke down the difference between the no standardized test and the yes standardized test.
Oh, like why you should have a
Yeah,
testing?
why is your style of performance assessment grading important for the standardized tests?
Behaviors.
Also behaviors?
It really influences behaviors a lot. Teachers who complain that kids are poorly behaved in their classes can fix a lot of that problem by just showing kids they're learning. Because I think humans are predisposed to like become addicted to seeing themselves learn and get better at things. I think it's the fundamental truth of why video games are so addictive, is because you can quickly and easily see that you're getting better at something. And I think there's something in us that wants that
Yeah, for
feeds
sure.
off of that. And so teachers who struggle with behaviors, this is one of the fundamental ways. Like, don't drill sergeant it. Show them the truth. Always showing them the truth.
Yeah, and basically every video game gives performance-based feedback, right?
Yeah.
You play Call of Duty, you get your kill-death ratio at the end of every match,
Yes.
and as you keep playing it, you get measurably better
Yeah.
because you get better guns and better sights and such.
And by using standards, it's even, I already have this as a podcast, it's even easier to do this grading and to give this feedback quickly.
All right. Is it recap?
Recap us, Jared.
Recap. Grading is your data.
Yes.
You don't want to pollute your data.
No. Yes, pollute. Very good. I like that. Pollute.
Which is what you'll do if you mix too much learning-based assessments, like group projects.
Well, learning data. It's not an assessment, but
Sure.
learning data. Okay.
But if you make your grade based on things that's not individual performance, then you're going to pollute it.
Yes.
And that's bad for everything that you're trying to do.
Yes.
So make your grades about individual performance assessment.
Correct.
Not homework, not projects. You probably will grade the learning stuff, homework and projects, but don't sweat it.
Yeah, you're not going to grade it, probably.
Don't invest too much energy into grading homework or projects or other things that aren't assessment, they're learning.
Yeah.
Ideally, you set that up so that the students will grade it themselves or through their peers, with you having a final look at it so that you don't have to spend very much time on it.
Yeah, I spend like 3 minutes and I simply sort them into my piles and then put a grade on top.
And then having assessments, especially pre-assessments, lets you know what students know and actually need to learn, which will go a long way towards managing behaviors.
If you share where kids are at with them. Yeah. And the assessment, we have a podcast on pre-assessments.
Yes, go listen to that.
Go listen to that.
And rubrics, which is a future podcast,
Future one.
but is really important, especially if you're going to have students grading other students' stuff. But even if you are grading something that's not strictly objective, like a test.
We should say that if you're having other students do it, don't call it grading, call it feedback.
Sure.
Because they're not evaluating whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, they're just saying
They're
what
providing
part of the rubric is
feedback
true.
on where you are.
Right. Anything else?
No.
All right. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, Jared.
Joanna, do you get questions from listeners ever?
Yes, we do.
How do those listeners send you questions?
They send us an email.
Where does that email go?
teachertalk4teachers@gmail.com.
But wait, what kind of 4? How do I do 4?
All of the 4s. They can do a number 4. They can write the word FOR, or they can do FOUR, even though that one doesn't quite make sense.
Well, perfect. teachertalk4teachers@gmail.com.
Yes.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, Jared.
Teacher Talk, the podcast for teachers who are lifers but still want to have a life.